Today's episode sheds light on a transition from a misaligned career to an entrepreneurial venture filled with joy. Listen in, and the secret to this is when it feels joyful, the business grows. Welcome to this episode of She Made It. I am your host, Elle Zimmerman, and today's episode we are having a conversation with illustrator, letterer, educator, artist, Deanna Talwalkar. And I'm also going to welcome my lovely co-host, Clara. Hey, Clara.
Hi, Elle. This is a really exciting episode. I know we've both been following along with Deanna's work on Instagram, and we just love it.
Yeah, it's so, there was such a connection to her because there's a couple pieces that really resonated with me, and we kind of dig into them in the episode. The first was that she loves the Enneagram, which I am a lover of the Enneagram, and I've been getting certified over the last year to coach and facilitate using the Enneagram. Also, the name of her company is Mirabelle Creations, and you'll learn why that is so, why that created such curiosity for me. And the last is that she just has this really wonderful presence on Instagram that we're going to kind of share a little bit about how that started and how it grew and sort of what motivates her and why she does what she does.
Yeah, the pivot that she's made is so fascinating from one career in a totally different industry now to being an illustrator and a letterer. And it's so neat because the work you do with women often helps them transition from something that may not feel authentic and like them to something that feels more like them. So I wanted to go ahead and share your personal scheduling link because I know that you love to jump on the phone for a free 1-hour call with anyone who's sort of thinking about making that kind of transition. So if you are interested in that, listener, you can go to Calendly, that's calendly.com/Elle Zimmerman, and you can schedule a call with Elle for free. It's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Clara. I get so much joy out of helping women find clarity, find confidence, particularly using the Enneagram and creativity, which is why I'm really excited about this conversation. So, Claire, before we jump in, I'd love you to give our listeners a little bit of a background on Deanna.
Sure. So Deanna Talwalkar is a letterer, illustrator, and educator on a mission to create joy. She started her career in what she thought was her dream job as a lawyer, but found herself exhausted and overwhelmed by that profession instead. As she reshifted her focus to care for her kids full-time, she started dabbling in graphic design while they were at school. That became Mirabelle Creations, which she founded to help you create more joy in your everyday life with hand-lettered tutorials, art, and goods.
Welcome to this episode of She Made It. I am so excited to welcome my guest today, Deanna Talwalkar, all the way from Lexington, Kentucky, which is actually not that far from me. I'm in Cincinnati. So welcome, Deanna.
Hi, Elle. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so happy to have you here today. And I know that, are you born and raised in Lexington?
I actually am. Yes, I was born here, raised here. I lived in Georgia for a while when I was in law school and working as a lawyer afterwards for a few years. But most of my years have been spent in Kentucky.
Yeah. And I came back. Well, I grew up in Ohio. And then I came back, and the joke in Cincinnati, and I don't know if you hear this all the way down in Lexington, but the joke is, because everyone makes fun of Ohio. I don't know why, but everybody makes fun of Ohio. But us Ohioans, us Southern Ohioans also say, well, at least we're not from Kentucky.
There you go.
Do you hear that?
We say, at least we're not from Tennessee. So, yes.
That's hysterical.
Because, yes, here in Kentucky, Tennessee is the place where we joke about. Isn't that funny?
That is really funny. Well, and because Cincinnati is right on the river, and Northern Kentucky, a lot of people who live and work, not live, but a lot of people who work in Cincinnati live in Northern Kentucky. So there's this little rivalry across the river. But anyway, so I I just want to share with our listeners a little bit about how you ended up as a guest on the podcast. First of all, your name, the name of your company, Mirabelle Creations, instantly drew me in. And we'll get to, I'd love to ask a little bit about where that came from. But the second part of it was you are crazy about the Enneagram, and a lot of the art that you create is focused around the Enneagram. And then the third thing that drew me in is that you went from this very traditional career of law, being a lawyer, into now being an artist. And those three things are so connected to me. So I'd love to kind of like tease apart each of those areas, and then that will help our listeners kind of learn about your journey, learn about what you're doing now, and then share, why the Enneagram is so interesting to you. How does that sound?
That sounds great. That's perfect.
Yeah. And before we get into those three areas, one question that I think would be great to ask you that I often ask my listeners, because obviously you had this career in law, but there was probably something always sort of tugging at you that is the artist in you. And so I love to ask my creative guests, what is your first creative memory?
Yes. I grew up, in our house, my mom was always, I would say, a crafty kind of person. There was always a lot of crafting, sewing, those kind of things going on. I don't recall a lot of traditional like sketching and drawing. I loved writing. My two biggest interests probably as kids were I would write, read, and I loved making fashion and outfits for my Barbie dolls.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I really kind of was obsessed with as a kid. But the one thing I really remember, my first memory of thinking, maybe I could do something with art was in middle school. I took an art class and we did a lot of traditional, drawings, sketching the apples and different little scenes or whatever. But we did something, the thing that I recalled loving and the teacher talking to me about was we made patterns one day. And I loved connecting the geometric shapes. We cut out different patterns with construction paper and made just kind of using circles and squares and triangles. And we made all these patterns. And after we did it, she came to me and she was like, wow, you did a really great job. I could really see you doing something with graphic design. And it was not something as a kid that I really thought about, but just hearing an adult's feedback, adult that was not my parent, for example, and saying, oh, that was a really good job. I think you could do something with that. It really stuck with me. It was just kind of the first time I felt validated in that way. So I would say that was probably maybe not my first creative moment as a child, but it's definitely the first moment that stuck out that kind of showed me that I have an inner artist within myself.
So what's so beautiful about that is that I often hear the opposite. The teacher, the choir director, who told the student that they were terrible and that they would never be good at something. So how lucky, what a gift. And again, just the power of the encouragement and this little spark. Yep.
Yes. And that's something, I have children myself and have helped in the schools. And that's always something I try to remember, like always speaking that life into them. And just a little tiny compliment, even sometimes can change a child's perspective. So it was really, it was influential to me. It made a huge impact in my life. It was something little. And I'm sure I honestly can't even remember the art teacher's first name, or last name either. But and I'm sure something she would never remember saying, but it made a big impact in my life at the time.
Yeah. So you are, I think, an incredible artist. And what I love about your work, and people can find you on Instagram at Mirabelle Creations. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, Mirabelle Creations. And we'll give you that in the show notes as well. What I love about what you do is, because you talked about fashion, you talked about pattern, we haven't gotten to the Enneagram yet, but so much of your art sort of weaves that together.
Correct. I agree. Like, I definitely, as you mentioned, the Enneagram, there is some pattern into that. And I think that's just how my mind works, kind of creates patterns even when they're not there. And it just is how I think my art sometimes comes out and expresses itself. I wouldn't say, and I think as all artists, we feel like, there's a lot more talented artists and illustrators, but I like to kind of use my art to teach people something or kind of help them through something. So, as much as I sometimes think of myself as an artist, oftentimes I think of myself almost as an educator just as much, because that's what I want to use my art to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so take us on the journey. So you actually started out as a lawyer.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Like a lot of women growing up, I, followed the traditional path, went to high school, went to college, did well in school, was in college. And, my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, he was going to med school. I think as kids who are, somewhat achievers or do well in school, you feel the pressure to do something respectable maybe or
Yeah.
something that sounds good. And I knew science was never going to be my strength. I never really had a desire to go to med school, although I did love psychology, which I think comes back around to the Enneagram a little bit. But I did a lot of writing, so I was in college and kind of thought, what am I going to do next? I didn't really see myself working corporate at the time, so I thought law school would be a good option. And I got into it, graduated, went to work in a big law firm, and quickly realized it was probably not where my passion was. Taking the path that other people might think is the best path is not always what ends up as the best for you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's tough. It's tough when you get through it. You go through all the schooling, get the job, and then you discover that.
Right. And I, as a lawyer, and I came out of school at a time where the profession was booming. So I got hired at one salary. And before I even started, they had already upped our salaries because everything was so competitive at the time. So I was making really good money as a lawyer. Started in Atlanta. And then my husband was in medical school and did residency, got landed back here in Kentucky. So I moved here and started working in a law firm here, and just kind of started to realize that this, practicing law is a lot of time and a lot of commitment, and it takes up a lot of your life. And if it's not something you feel passionate about or really enjoy, it can kind of start to feel like a lot of jobs when you aren't happy, like a drain on your life more than anything. So,
And you also, I think I read in your information about yourself on your website, you talked about how it felt like your life was measured in hours.
yes. So that was the big thing for me. I was in corporate law. So everything is broken down into billable hours. So every 15-minute increment of the day, you're writing down what you're doing. So you're billing the client, and that's how you make your money. Well, that just immediately was really tough for me. Tough for me to remember to write it down, tough for me to feel comfortable. Like if I spent 8 minutes on something, would I charge somebody a whole 15 minutes for that? Because that didn't seem like that was right to me. And so it just became a very much of a grind to measure my life in that way. So actually, I had my first child and my daughter, who's now 18, and I practiced for about 6 more months. And then I left that job and went to work for a federal judge. So once I had her, I worked part-time for a federal judge writing. So basically how federal judges all have clerks who write their opinions for them. So, you would go in, talk to the judge. He would say, this is how I'm going to rule. Can you see what the law says? Make sure it supports me, tell me that I'm doing the right thing. So you research it for them, and then you write the paper, and then they kind of change it if they want to make it more their own. So I actually went and did that for a couple years after my daughter was born, and that was better. It
Like
allowed
a ghostwriter.
It's kind of like, yeah, like all federal judges kind of have what you would call almost a ghostwriters. Yes. Clerks
Interesting.
that they talk with, and our job was to research. And if the judge was thinking he's going to rule a certain way, if you go back and research it and the law says, no, that's not right, it's also was our job to kind of talk to them about it, but then to write their opinions for them. So I did that. And I liked that better. It was part-time. There was no billable hours because there was no client. Your judge was who you were working for. And if the judge you're working for is easy to work with, you made it much better. But then we had my second child and we moved towns, and I decided at that time it was time for me to take a break. So
yeah.
I did that.
And how did you land in what you're doing
now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's because to go from law to this incredible art, how did that happen?
And that's still a good question to me too, I think. It started, so I did take a break. My son was born, my daughter was 3. And I took a break and really wasn't doing any working at that time, was just focusing on having 2 kids, 3 and under. And then when my son started school, so about 5 years later, I just knew I needed something else. I had gotten him through the really what I call the toughest parenting years physically when they're little.
Yeah, thank you for that qualification, as we both have teenagers.
Yes, but it's definitely the most time-consuming, physically demanding part of parenting before they start school. The emotional and psychological stuff, that all comes later. But and I just loved, when my kids were having birthdays, I would always make all their invitations and all the decorations, because everything I found in the stores at the time, now it's much better now, but when my kids were little, it was all character stuff. And it was just all very commercialized products for parties. So I started making my own stuff for years. And so then when my son started kindergarten, I started learning graphic design so I could make them on the computer and do all that stuff. So that's honestly how I started. I just got myself a design program, the Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and started learning how to do it on my own. Just kind of watching. At the time, there weren't a lot of courses online, but there was a lot of YouTube videos, and just kind of taught myself the graphic design and started making the invitations for friends. And so then it turned into an online business with an Etsy store. And honestly, I did that for a few years, and then people asked for art quotes, because I did a lot with fonts. I was really into fonts and pairing different letter styles together. And so then people started asking for signs for their child's bedroom, for example, or for their kitchen or whatever. So I kind of taught myself, did use the graphic design I learned for the invitations to make signs. And then with that, I turned into teaching myself how to hand letter and write beautiful letters so I could make them more custom. So that's kind of where my business was in 2019. And
can I ask you a question before we go further?
Sure.
Because I hear this, not this story, but I hear this, the comment that you said about, I did this because it wasn't there. And then people asked me, and then they asked me for more. And then and all the while I'm learning. But there's a piece in there that I wonder, how did people know that you were doing that, or that was was it just because you were good at networking? Was it the group of friends shared that information? Because a lot of people are doing things, but they're not getting those requests to grow or move into something different. Was it something you did?
So at the time when I first started with doing the parties for myself, it was just friends and family that would request something for their kid. They saw, maybe I posted a picture from my kids' party on Facebook. At the time was the big thing. And so then friends and family would ask. So then after, a few months of just doing a few projects for friends and family, I started a Facebook page and blog. Instagram wasn't even on the scene yet, where I was posting my parties on Instagram or my blog. And then through that, people would contact me. And initially it was just friends and family.
Yeah.
It wasn't random strangers, but
Sure.
yes. So then it became through like my Facebook. And I did eventually with my party printables start an Instagram, I'm sorry, an Etsy page. And then on Etsy, people would buy invitations and then they would say, hey, can you make a sign that coordinates with this? Or, if I had, for example, like a ladybug theme for my child's first birthday, can you also create a piece of art for her room that would kind of commemorate the party and be something I could hang in her room too?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like you asked, it was first just friends and family. And then as I posted on Facebook and started my Etsy store, that's where I would get other requests too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I just, the always learning
Yes.
and then saying, yes, I'll do that. Sure. I'm not sure how, and I'll go figure that out.
And that's exactly what happened. There were several times I said yes to things I probably wasn't ready to say yes to, but it did force you to quickly learn some of the skills that you needed to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I was with my business in probably even the summer of 2019. I had an Instagram page I had moved away at that point from party stuff, but I had, created a lot of hand letter pieces of art, inspirational art, was teaching some classes locally on that. And I had an Instagram page kind of focused on inspirational quotes and inspirational lettering and teaching people to letter. And then I posted something about the Enneagram just because it was something that I was interested in. I had seen a few things on the Enneagram on Instagram, and I had used it in my own life to really help my relationship with my kids and my husband. It had really been instrumental in changing some things in my life that were small changes but had huge impact. And so I posted something about it on my Instagram page. And that is when it just kind of all blew up, honestly. At the time,
Really?
I had about 5,000 followers. And like I said, this was 2019. So I think the Enneagram was kind of newer back then. And, that first thing I posted had like maybe 1,000 or 2,000 likes on it. And I probably had never gotten over like 100 likes on something on an Instagram
Right.
post. And so people just wanted more of that. And the more Enneagram posts that I created, and at this point, it was just kind of collages or little signs that described each type. And people just loved it and wanted more and more content on that. And it was such just kind of a coincidence in a lot of ways, but I loved learning about the Enneagram. So I felt so passionate about that subject that it was easy for me to create the art on that topic. And so it just kind of took off at that point.
So that was when in 2019.
That was probably August of 2019. I think I had 5,000 or 6,000 followers. Probably by the end of August, it had gotten to 10,000. And maybe
Wow.
either end of August or middle of September, somewhere in that frame. And I remember at the time thinking, okay, I just need 10,000 followers because then I can get the swipe up feature on my stories.
Yep.
And that was like my goal of life. And then it probably doubled by the end of the year, 2019. I probably was at 20,000. And then from the beginning of 2020 to this year is where it grew a lot. And I think, some of that might have been everybody at home. You're spending more time on Instagram, but I really saw the majority of my growth and the growth of my business in this last year.
And what are you at now?
I have a little over 100,000.
Congratulations. That is amazing.
Thank you.
That is amazing.
It's definitely been an interesting just because it wasn't necessarily what I set out to do, but now I feel, even though it wasn't what I intended, where I wasn't necessarily intending my business to go 10 years ago, I didn't even know about the Enneagram. It feels like it's where I'm supposed to be now.
Right. And so because I love to get into the little nuts and bolts part of this. So did that translate into more sales?
Yes, definitely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, even just my Etsy shop, I think at one point I looked, it was up 600% just, in views and sales, it definitely it was definitely correlated in my business too, and my sales in my shop. And then I've also, it also led to some small projects for companies and things like that too.
Like graphic design stuff or Enneagram stuff or?
Both. Yes. Yes.
So cool. So how did you manage that growth?
As far as emotionally or
Well, both. That's a great question. It's funny you go there first. Because you and I will talk about the Enneagram because I'm a 4 and you're a 6.
yes. And
And
yes, I saw that. And I didn't realize you were so into the Enneagram until I kind of looked up a few things.
yeah, and as a 6, you would be going 10,000, yay, 20,000, uh-oh, 100,000, what now? What do I do?
Well, it's interesting because you say that, because I do think like I said, I had that 10,000 goal, and then I thought, oh, 50,000, that would be awesome. And I hit that. And then I hit 100,000 earlier this year. And I do think I was kind of like, okay, what now? What am I supposed to be doing? Where's my goals? What am I focused on? And I think
Yeah.
there is when you do grow like that, you also want to keep that momentum grow. I think you want to keep growing, but you're not even sure why. And so this was when I kind of hit that 100,000, I had tried to keep growing the Instagram. And now that I kind of hit that number, it kind of freed me to think outside of that a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in terms of do you have a team of people that help you with this, or did you have to expand that?
No, I'm pretty much on my own. I really don't have a team. And I probably need to be getting to that point more.
Uh-huh.
And that's something I'm looking into, just taking some of the little things off of my plate, so I can focus on some of the bigger things. But no, I mean, right now I'm pretty much doing it all myself, but I'm also trying to figure out where I do need to expand that.
Uh-huh. Now, when you sell your art, is it digital? Are you shipping stuff or?
More digital. I do have the option of having it printed and shipped to people, but it's mostly digital. I was trying to do a lot more just selling it as art piece, as a print, and it became overwhelming.
Yeah, I would
So,
think.
yeah, and love that people want to purchase my art, and if it helps them, then I want them to be able to purchase it, but at some point it became better for me to just have it digital so they can just do it that way, and taking that side of the shipping and the printing and the packaging off my plate a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So that helps me understand how you were able to grow, because just because you sold more doesn't mean there was more work on that part of it.
Right. And there's
Yeah.
times where people, like around Christmas, they want a lot more printed items because they're giving it as gifts, and they want it packaged nicely. So there are times when it gets a little busier with that. But yes, now it's pretty much almost all digital, just because that is much more manageable for me. I think in a lot of ways, I would probably sell more if it was all printed, because people don't always realize that's an option. And a lot of people want that. But at some point, it's just not quite worth all the work
Yeah.
that entails.
Sure. And do you create every day?
Pretty well, I would say 5 to 6 days a week. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I like doing it. For me, that's the easy part of it. It's funny because my son will say, Mom, you post too much, because I'll post twice a day a lot of times. But I like making the art and I like doing that. So it doesn't feel like it's too much, because that's the part I really enjoy the most.
Yeah. And so if you had to say, okay, here's my day, and about this percentage is creating and about this percentage is marketing or the business, how does that look for you?
I would say it's probably 50-50, maybe 60-40 art. And I really probably need to do better on some of the marketing and the other administrative stuff. But again, the art is what I enjoy doing. So I oftentimes will let that other stuff suffer, because I'd rather be creating the art.
Sure.
And researching. I also spend some of that time in creating is researching about the different topics that I'm creating for also, because I think that's where my strength or my heart lies, kind of getting information that's useful to people. So I, just spend time educating and researching those topics too.
Yeah. And so, other than the Enneagram, what are the other topics that you like to teach, talk, create about?
Sure. Anxiety, as you mentioned, I am a 6, and we tend to be labeled as worriers. And unfortunately, that is true for me. Not all 6s are anxious and worriers, but I tend to be one of those 6s who are. So I do talk about anxiety and just, living with mental health issues, or just overwhelm issues. So probably anxiety, self-care, and boundaries, which I think are linked, self-love, which all I think tie into the Enneagram. I think my account is primarily focused on growth for people. So like I said, the boundaries, the self-care, the self-love, anxiety, and then just finding joy in little things in life.
Yeah, and it's very clear. I've followed you, and I've read many of your posts. So I would say, yeah, that's very clear.
Good.
Yeah, and I love though when you sort of get even more specific. Where I think you did a series which ties back into the Barbie dolls. You did I think it was the awards show series of dresses, and then what type they would be wearing, and that was really clever.
Yes,
That
that was a
was
lot
really
of fun.
fun.
And I had someone message me this week, please do that for the Oscars, but I'm so busy right now that I'm not sure that's going to happen this time
Yeah.
around too. But yeah, that was a lot of fun to create. I think one of the things about the Enneagram that why it has taken off and people like it so much is it is about you.
Mm-hmm.
People want to come to get on Instagram and read something that relates to them. And so they love looking, whether it be at Golden Globe dresses for each Enneagram type, they love to look at stuff or consume content that is about themselves.
Yeah.
And it teaches them something, hopefully, in the process. But, if you can go on someone's page and read something and say, oh, that's me, then that's the kind of content that people are going to share and like and enjoy and save and feel like they relate to. So I think
Yeah.
that's why the Enneagram has become so popular.
Yeah. So you feel like you've noticed a difference from 2019 till now in Enneagram sort of awareness and popularity?
I think so. Yes. I do think it has grown. It's interesting because my husband, when I first started talking about the Enneagram, he was kind of like, oh, whatever, didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it. I think because he didn't love the fact that he was a type 1 perfectionist. Even
Yeah.
though he definitely is, I think he resisted that a little bit. But now it's so funny. He's a physician and he will come home and tell me the other day, he was like, oh, I was in the operating room and this person was telling me about how they're a type 2 and this person's a type 3. And then the 4 other people that were scrubbed into the surgery didn't know what their Enneagram was. And I think that still probably holds true. I think there's a large part of the population that knows about it, is very interested in. And then there's another part of the population that still really hasn't even heard of it.
Yeah. And I'm finding there's also pockets in the country. Cincinnati is very prolific in the Enneagram.
Yes,
Nashville. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my involvement with the Enneagram started probably, I think it was either 2018, 2019. I was introduced to it through a therapist, actually. And I just instantly became drawn and fell in love with it and just devoured everything I could about it. But it was really, again, more just for me.
Right.
And then when the pandemic hit, my business, I manage the speaking career of my husband. And so as of March 2020, large speaking events, he does corporate speaking, big association, organization speaking, all those ended like overnight. Everything was canceled, rescheduled, shut down. And so I found myself with more time, and then found that a lot of the I guess the organizations that certify for the Enneagram were offering online options So then I dug into that. So I'm now certified through the Enneagram in business because I was already doing a lot of corporate consulting and coaching through the speaking side. We would then go in and do like follow-up programming. So I was doing a lot of that already. So I thought, ooh, incorporating the Enneagram for that sort of work would be really cool. But then, like you, I had this interest in psychology, having had the background as, in acting, which is really all about dissecting human nature and relationships. It felt like a really great fit to go further into how does it really help the individual to be more whole, to be more aware. And then I started digging into the narrative Enneagram, which is another way of sort of teaching. So I'm going through that process. And when I work with women now, mostly a big theme is confidence. A lot of women in transition are looking for clarity. I have found that layering in the Enneagram has just deepened the work that I do. And it just, like you said, it gives them a pattern. You said how you love patterns, and the Enneagram is this pattern. It's this sort of map that doesn't just identify who you are, which is like more what I feel like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC. It tells you, I think it gives you resources to where you can go to be even more whole, whether that's the integration of the arrows or the wings or, I'm just sort of like geeking out over it and trying to really learn and how can I incorporate it into the coaching that I do.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because, where I'm coming from is the art side. I've used it more in a larger scale to get information out to people so they can do those things on their own.
Sure.
So it would be great, in my mind, I'm hoping that I'm helping people kind of get that first step into the Enneagram. And then if they want to go really deep with somebody, they would call someone like you, a coach or a therapist, and work deeper with it. But I just think for me, like you mentioned, it gave me clarity on a few issues in my life that kept reoccurring as far as whether it be like disagreements with my husband. We would have the same agreement or disagreement every time we fought, basically. And it basically boiled down to the fact that I am a type 6 and I freak out about a lot of stuff and just want to talk about it and freak out about it and just stress to get it off my chest. And that makes me feel better. But to him, that was me criticizing him.
Right.
So once I realized that was our pattern, which, me freaking out was him taking it as a criticism of him as a one, we both kind of realized that's what was going on. It allowed us to get through all of that and actually be able to discuss some real issue, any issues that we were actually having, which usually tended to be way less than what the argument would end up as because of our pattern. So it just helped me in so many ways. And I want to be able to spread that to as many people as possible. And this is kind of the platform I've been able to use to do that.
Yeah. And what I love about the Enneagram too is that nobody really can type you. You have to sort of discover that for yourself. And the typing process can be long for people. And that's what you do. You give them the opportunity to really understand a little bit more about the types. And you do it through these incredible visuals or keywords or, and because, I can't really coach someone until that the type is identified. And I can help them. I can go through interview questions and help them to discern it. But boy, we can get so much further faster if they are clear and they've discovered for themselves their type. So that's what you do. Yeah.
And I've had a lot of people, whether it be people that I actually know in person that have spoken to me or people that have contacted me through my page, that the Enneagram, they had heard about it before, but they just couldn't get into it because it wasn't really accessible. Meaning, I think, a lot of the books that you see, a lot of times people look at them and they don't look fun at first, I guess. And we are now, our culture, I think if you can get introduced to it in a more accessible way and maybe a fun, light, and that's kind of what I try to do with my graphics. the Enneagram can have some heavy topics sometimes, but I tend to stay on the more positive side of it because I don't feel like my goal is to dig super deep with people. My goal is to kind of get them their foot in the door and get them interested in the Enneagram. And then they could, like you said, go work with you. So I think, a lot of people aren't sure when they first start because they might have trouble typing or they don't really understand all the terms. So that's where I'm trying to make it a little more digestible for people in a simple way.
And what's funny is that because I'm a 4, so naturally I want to go deep and intense and complex and dig in there.
Not everyone is as in tune with their own emotions, I think, as a lot of 4s are too. And it's hard. It's a struggle for some people. And, people contact me almost daily. I can't decide my type. I can't, what's wrong with me. And, I tell them that's okay. Like we all have our self-growth journey, and we all discover ourselves and our personalities at different rates. There's no right way and wrong way. And a lot of times the people who really take time to find their type and go through it, they come out so much clearer than someone who reads a couple paragraphs and takes a test and like, oh, I'm definitely a 3. I think that journey, you learn so much. So don't be afraid to take the time to figure out your type. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you in doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know if you, in some of my posts, I talk about how I was actually mistyped.
Yes.
And I was mistyped a 1. And I totally relate to your husband. I did not want to be a 1. It is not fun to be the most critical, judgmental, And again, what I realized, my aversion to being a 1 was because it really wasn't my home base.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, because I think there's incredible things about a 1 as well.
I wouldn't trade anything about his personality.
Yeah.
There's so many beautiful things about 1s. And I think he in particular makes all of us be better people, and they're not always critical and judgmental. That's, one of the stereotypes that is common, but a lot of times they're the most critical of themselves. And once you realize that, if anything that you can think critical about them, they've already thought about themselves 1,000 times over. It gives you a lot of compassion towards how their brains work, how one's brains work.
And I like the title reformer. Sometimes they're called the perfectionist, but I like reformer. And wouldn't you want your surgeon to be a 1?
Yes. He often complains about being slow, sometimes taking longer. And I tell him, if you are ever operating on me, you take as long as you need.
Yeah.
So, for sure. And it is, you're right. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you are in a field that aligns with your personality, you're going to be so much better at it and love it so much more than if it is, someone like me, who is a big picture person, could never do those kind of jobs with the details. So,
and that's a great place for me to ask you this question. So as a lawyer and now an artist, and I would say a teacher of the Enneagram, and you said you've done letter writing or what do you call that?
Lettering
or calligraphy. Yes.
Yeah. So where do you feel your type fits in with now this such different path and career?
Well, I do think, when I was an attorney, my 6 side was actually really helpful because I did a lot of contract writing. And so I could, as a type 6, we tend to be known as the type that will overplan. So that was very helpful when I was writing contracts because I could imagine the worst case scenario and account for that. Now, in my personal life, that's not necessarily always the most helpful trait. Always we're imagining the worst case scenarios, but as an attorney, it actually was very helpful.
See, and I've always heard it's great to have a 6 around.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I mean, my friends, before this pandemic broke, several of my friends teased me because I had already bought like a meal, like 2 weeks worth of meal stuff back in like January last year. They're like, what? And I was like, oh, it's coming. It's coming. Y'all just get ready. And they're like,
Oh,
no.
that's funny.
But I was the
Yes.
first one. My basement was ready with
You had all the toilet paper.
I did have all the toilet paper. So yes, it can be very helpful. But I do think why it's useful to me now is because as a six, I have had anxiety and struggled with things in my life, which we all have, but having those struggles allows me to be more open-minded and not critical of other people's struggles. Um, so I do think I try to create a space on my Instagram that is very inclusive and not judgmental and welcoming and supportive. And I think a lot of the sixes that you might have in your life tend to be that way. We tend to be, we're not necessarily first on the scene. We're there kind of in the background helping you and being loyal to you and supportive. And that's something that I want to kind of convey in my messages too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because six is often called the loyalist.
Right. We're probably, once it takes a long time for us to be your friend, a lot of times we might be a little skeptical of you at first, but once we're your friend forever. And we will be loyal and be accepting of you. And I think that's what I try to convey and teach to people too, is that, we all need more loyalty and acceptance of other people and personality types. People will ask me, oh, is this a good type? And I'm, there's good and bad about every type.
Yeah.
And I hope that I try in my art to convey that. Every once in a while I'll get one type who says I'm too tough on them or whatever it may be. But I try to convey and focus on the positive and, without ignoring the negative sides, but how you can take those negative sides and grow despite or with those sides, I guess.
Yeah. It's, something that has been a challenge for me. And this is why this conversation is so helpful for me personally is the sixes have been a bit of a confusion for me. And I don't know if that's because of my four and I just can't quite understand. Or do you have that with any type that it's like I can't quite put my finger on this type? And I don't know why it's the sixes. I don't know. I don't have a six in my life, like a close relationship, close friendship. So that could be it. But
well, another reason that could be it is sixes often if you'll read about them, it says they're the ones who always think they're another type too.
Oh,
they're always,
interesting.
and this has been something that really helped me with learning that I'm a six is we tend to question everything. And that includes questioning both who we are and what we are. For years, I think a lot of my anxiety, it started when I gave birth. I had some postpartum kind of OCD almost to my first child, kind of postpartum anxiety. There was a case in the news where a mother had done something to her child when I was pregnant. And I remember I kind of became really worried. What if that happened to me? What if I snapped? What if I did something like that? And that is a very common six thing. You don't even really trust yourself. And I always, before I learned about the Enneagram, I always thought, well, I don't trust myself. I trust that something bad could happen because maybe there's something bad about me, which wasn't true. It wasn't the truth. And the people who, the more I learned when I kind of had this anxiety, my therapist said, the people who worry about hurting their kids will never hurt their kids. These are just people who are worriers. These are people who, just don't necessarily have confidence in their own abilities. And they're worried that something they could snap, for instance, or whatever it is. And those aren't the people that would ever do that thing. So I think a lot of sixes don't know themselves or don't trust themselves or worried that they're, there's inherently something wrong with them. So that may be some of your issue.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. Well, I think my daughter, who's 18, she's been a challenge for me. We've gone through many typing conversations and I think she might be a six.
Interesting. Yeah. They're
Yeah.
usually the last to decide. Like
Yeah.
they take the longest to find their type.
And she worries a lot. And yeah, so I'm just saying, be curious. You know, you don't have to decide or pick or know, but I love also too that that's an area of focus for your art because, you know, we teach what we need most to learn, what we need most to practice, or the journey where we've taken and now we have some wisdom to share. So that's really clear that that's very, very authentic and real for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have a lot of fours in my life, so maybe we need to like communicate some because
I'm very melodramatic and very
Oh.
intense, and I can wear my friends out. That's my problem.
I feel like a lot of times, like you said, sometimes I'll include something in a piece of art for fours and I feel like I've nailed it, but they don't always think that I've nailed it. But I always kind of attribute that to the fact that fours are hard to nail down because they want that to be unique and authentic. So I always kind of maybe assumed it was a little bit of that, but maybe it's
Yeah, it probably, and also I think there's the what I identify a lot with as a four because it's been more like your personal growth journey has been anxiety. Mine has been longing, like a dissatisfaction, like always yearning, like there's got to be more, there's got to be something else. So I think, so there's like that lack of satisfaction, you know? And I think that a four also would be, you know, they look for what's missing. So when you're drawing something about a four, yeah, it's probably, there's a lot of, it's not ideal enough or it's not unique enough or
right. And fours resist being categorized into any kind of group, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I'm a band of one. And I was watching something on HBO has a special about personality, a documentary about personality types. I didn't get through the whole thing. It's mostly focused on the Myers-Briggs. And it was one of the gentlemen they were interviewing is an INFJ. And I was very proud because I'm an INFJ. And I was very proud and I had to pause it and play it again and again that according to him, which we don't know if this is true, the INFJ is the most rare.
Yes,
so, I have. Boy, did that feel good as a four.
Right.
And who cares, right? Who knows? Yeah. Yeah. So I really want to hear now. I think this is the last part of the three things. So the name of your company is sort of what caught my attention first because my daughter's name is Mirabelle. And it's so funny because now that I'm connecting the dots, being a four, I wanted all of my children's names to be very unique. And so Mirabelle was a name I sort of like made up, even though that name is out there. I don't think it was in a book so we don't really come across many Mirabelles. And I was fascinated by the name of your company. So I'd love to hear how that came about.
Well, it's funny you say that because my name's Deanna. So it was always pronounced strangely as a child, Deanna, Deanne, Diana, all the things. And then my husband's family is from India. So he goes by Jay, but his name is actually Janak and it's spelled Janak. And so as a child, he's a first generation American. So he was born here in Kentucky, actually, but he had that name and he went by that name growing up, not Jay. And it was always a struggle for him because he had such a unique name. So when we had our first child, I wanted to honor his heritage a little bit and name her an Indian name, but that was hard to come up with in a way that could be pronounced easily here in America. So we chose Mira because that is an Indian name. And you can either spell it Meera or Mira. And we chose the latter. And we named her that. And so that's where it came from. And when she was a baby, we always called her Mirabelle. Like it was just kind of like, I was kind of the sing-song version of what I would call her sometimes, instead of just Mira, it was Mirabelle. And that's just kind of how I ended up naming the business after that because I always liked that connection. And I liked that it kind of translated in Spanish. It kind of translates into, look and beautiful. And so those were kind of, I kind of wanted to create beauty in the world. So that was kind of seemed to be a good fit.
I love it. And what's interesting is that my daughter, it was Mirabelle, but then we always thought we were going to call her Mira.
Okay.
Because we have a really long last name, Zimmerman. So it was Mira Zimmerman was what we thought we would call her. And at the time, Mira Sorvino was there was some popularity around her and that name. And so she was born and she just was a Mirabelle. And so we've always kept the full name for her. But yeah, I love it. I love because again, for you, it still was about meaning.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
then
I'll tell you,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. The funny thing was, I was so worried about it being pronounced correctly and finding an Indian name that would be, not a burden to her because people mispronounced it all the time. And so the first doctor's appointment when she was 2 days old, the nurse came out and called her name and they called out Myra Talwalkar. And I just immediately burst into tears. But I kind of failed to remember that we were in Kentucky when I named her Mira, that she would still probably be called the wrong thing a lot. But
funny.
But so she inherited that name and it's a family name of his too. So
beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to, before we wrap up, to give people, our listeners, a place to find you on Instagram. I think we've said it, but if you could just maybe share it again. And if there's anywhere else you'd like them to go to learn more.
So yes, I'm at Instagram at Mirabelle Creations. And I also have a website if they want to check that out. And it's the same. It's www.mirabellecreations.com. So it's all the same.
And then all of those will get you to the Etsy shop?
Yes, I've got links to both on either way. But I'm most active on Instagram. If they, have questions, I check comments and DMs most frequently there. I'm really bad about checking my email. So, if someone has something they want to follow up with or a question, that's probably the best place to find me.
And do you get a lot of interaction? Do you spend a lot of time doing that?
I've had to limit some just because I do, but I do tend to weekly try to do have people ask questions through my stories. And sometimes I can keep up with those pretty quickly, but I try to answer as many DMs as possible. But oftentimes if people send me, long DMs about their typing, that's not something I can answer for everyone.
Sure, yeah.
But if it's something quick and something easy to answer, I do try to answer those. But yeah, sometimes I get a lot of requests for series about different topics. And unfortunately, I can't do all of the requests that I get either, but I do try to check them as frequently as possible.
Yeah. Well, I am so excited to see where you're going. You got up to that number and I loved how you shared that now it sort of frees you up to think like even bigger. So we'll keep an eye on where that goes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great having you today. Thank you so much, Deanna.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of She Made It. Our goal is to reach as many women as possible through this podcast to inspire them to find their truest, most creative selves. And we need your help. Apple Podcasts is way more likely to put our show on other people's radar if we have reviews. If you've enjoyed even just one episode of She Made It, we'd be so honored if you left a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. It's easiest to do this through the Apple Podcasts app on your phone, and if you're not sure how, just go to elzimmerman.com/review if you need some instructions. Thank you so much in advance. We cannot wait to hear from you.